I mean, people are dumb, that no doubt. And about subjects I don't study, I'm also not very familiar. But people wake up and, there are lots of voices. The media doesn't tell the people the truth. But because of that, nobody trusts the media and they go to other sites and so forth. They listen to programs like yours and they realize, well, the big loser in this whole conflict is Western Europe.
And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome Marc Faber back to the show. He is a legend in the investment world, and you've all heard his name. You've seen him on numerous media outlets over many, many years, and he's just got a storied career. It's great to have him back on. Marc, welcome. How are you?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program. And so far, all is well.
It's good. It's good to have you back.
Despite our horrible governments, everything is fine.
Well, many people would agree with you on that one, including yours truly. But I would maybe add the central bank in there as well, not just the government. I'm very critical of the way they've handled this situation. They let the economy run way too hot for too long. They should have raised rates sooner and more gradually, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Well, central banks are part of the package of government. The government in the US is, say, the administration, the State Department, the White House, the CIA, the FBI. These are all like states within the nation. No central bank is independent. They'll have to do what the politicians are telling them to do.
Yeah.
But of course, if inflation gets out of hand, as it does at the present time, then the central banks will say, well, we have to fight inflation. And then they'll succeed one day and the inflation will come down a bit. Then after they claimed that prices are going up because of Putin, when the prices will come down for a while, a little, they will say it's because of us and take the credit for bringing down inflation. They're a miserable group of people.
Yeah, it really does seem like the world is backed into a corner right now. How long do you think the inflation issue will persist? How badly will they have to fight it, or will they decide to fight it, I guess I should say?
Well, I'd like to state categorically that whenever you have inflation, it has been engineered by governments. In other words, if you look back at the last few years, an increase in the fiscal deficit is usually inflationary. Not in every case, but it's for sure inflationary if the fiscal deficit goes up and if it's financed through money printing by a central bank. This was the case in the last 3 years all over the world. So it's government induced, period.
Yep.
Number two, we have many examples. Say, when Biden became president, and we have people, they think this way and that way. But of course, if you discourage oil companies to drill in the US, if you shut down the Keystone pipeline and so forth and so on, there will be tightness in the energy market without any question.
Oh, yeah.
So that is precisely what the government has done. And in Europe, they don't have to go and fight and finance the Ukraine war. They could have come to an understanding with Putin that some territories in the east, that is in the west of Russia, which are Russian speaking, that they would cede this to Russia, or they could have declared neutrality and stated that Ukraine would not become member of NATO. There was no reason whatsoever to become member of NATO. But that was a bridge too far, and they went.
Yep.
And now they all have, in Europe, we have inflation we never had before.
Yeah.
But
It is.
again, this is government engineered.
Right. Yeah. Well, is the government engineering that just to push the middle class into, further down the socioeconomic ladder, or are they engineering that to reduce their debt obligations through what I call inflation-induced debt destruction?
In my opinion, there are people in this world, they're out to destroy Western culture.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not calling it hegemony any longer because we in Europe, we say 500 million people. And you in America, you're like 330 million.
Yep.
And in China alone, we have over 1 billion. In India, we have over 1 billion. We have countries like Indonesia with 250 million. You understand? Right. The Western world is small relative to the rest of the world. The manufacturing sector in China alone is larger than the manufacturing sector of the US and the EU combined. So it's not like 50, 100 years ago when China and India were tiny economies as a percent of the world.
Right.
We're going back to where China and India were in the 15th century when they were 60% of the world's GDP. There's a huge change. You understand? The neocons, the hardliners, especially in the US, they don't want to yield an inch. They think the rule of America is necessary for world peace.
Right.
I beg your pardon?
I was just going to say there are certainly a lot of people benefiting from that idea in terms of the military-industrial complex and so forth.
They are pathological characters.
Yeah.
If you work in the State Department, it's unlike that you're becoming very rich, maybe in the US because of corruption and so forth. Washington, D.C. is the capital in the world of corruption. There's more corruption in Washington, D.C. than any other place in the world in terms of amount of money flowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the politicians, they're not necessarily out to make money themselves. For them, it's power.
Right.
There are people in the world, Napoleon, he wanted to be influential, but it was power. Hitler wasn't interested in money, not at all.
Right.
Mao Zedong wasn't very interested in money, but power.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the inflation future? I mean, is it going to tame over the next year? Are we going to keep seeing this persistent inflation? Of course, energy costs are high, debt levels are very high.
Okay, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in the 70s, and then you can see what the problem is. So in the 70s, to be fair to the central bank in America, the inflation started to accelerate, but very, very modestly in the mid-60s. But it was never in the mid-60s above 3-4%. And then immediately they increased interest rates with the result that in 69, the 10-year Treasury note was yielding over 9%. Wow. From 69 to 71, it then dropped from 9% to 3%, okay? Then from the low in 72, interest rates went up to the end of 74 to over 12%, almost 13%, 12.9%.
Yep.
After 74, interest rates fell again to a low of approximately 4%. And then they rose again, and finally they peaked out at over 15%.
Yeah.
You understand? So you can have in a cycle of inflation, you can have a situation where, for instance, now we could have for the next 6 months, next 2 years, price is still going up, but not at 9% per annum. The rate of increase will maybe dropped to 7%, 6%, 5%, 4%. And then the central banks will say, well, look, we did it. we can ease again and print again, and boom, prices go up.
Well,
I'm not saying that this will be the case.
Yeah.
because there are some factors now that we don't control. Some of my friends who are well informed, and actually some of them live here in Asia, they're convinced the US will start a war against China.
Hmm.
They think we're already in war times.
That is very disconcerting for sure.
I
But
tell
war is inflationary, right?
you don't want to look at your portfolio when there is war with China. That I
Right.
can tell you.
It would just be amazing that we could go to war with China with so much of our economies intertwined. I mean, we are their biggest
They were
customer.
crazy, but the politicians are nuts.
Yeah.
Just look at the German politician. Look at this von der Leyen
Yeah.
in Germany. She's the president of the EU. Clueless. The foreign minister is a lady called Baerbock.
Yep.
She's clueless. Look at Kamala Harris, clueless.
Yeah. Obviously.
Look at Biden.
Asleep. Yeah.
He's not 100% up here.
Yeah. It's truly shocking that these people are running the world. It's very scary for sure. So is gold the hedge? What is the action step people can take listening, given what's going on?
If you go back to the 70s, the hedge was between 1970 and 73. It was wheat, corn, soybeans.
Mm-hmm.
Then the bull market in grains was over.
Right.
Then the best were coffee and cocoa until 77.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the period, the best were oil and oil stocks and oil drillers and oil servicing companies, and of course, mining companies,
Mm-hmm.
and silver and gold.
Yeah.
Just open any YouTube and look at central banks. The one in Europe, Lagarde, she is a vicious politician who is clueless, or she lies. She may, you never know with the politicians. Are they so clueless, or do they blatantly lie?
They're either stupid or evil. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to Greenspan, and I don't have a great admiration for him, but he was an intellect, and Volcker was a decent character. They were not lying as blatantly as the current crop of bureaucrats who run the central banks.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. It's gotten much worse. It certainly has deteriorated over the years. But is Powell going to really continue on his Volcker-esque sort of policy? I mean, they just seem determined to break the markets with these rate hikes. They're so sudden.
Well, you say the rate hikes are so sudden. I respond to that the central banks after 2008, after the great financial crisis, they kept interest rates artificially low for essentially from 2008, December, January 2009, until 2021.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about 12 years of almost zero interest rates. In Japan, negative interest rates, in the EU, negative interest rates. And when inflationary pressure started, and every economist, even someone in the first semester of an economic university studio, you can read it up in Samuelson, Introduction into Economics. I have it in German because I studied.
I love it that you pull the book out.
But, even there he writes, if you create government spending and money printing, of course the rate of inflation will accelerate.
Right.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But the central banks in Europe and in the US, they were sitting there and sleeping and sleepwalking and telling the people, oh, we have some pressures in the rate of inflation, but it's transitory. That's what they said.
Right.
But anyway, I want to come back to your question. I mean, for every investor, this is a big question. First of all, if the governments could lock you in, the governments can also take your money away. That people have to realize. They may not do it, but they can do it.
Yep.
First of all, someone says, oh, I have my house, I'm safe. No, they can tax it away.
Yeah. Nothing is
happened
safe. They can do whatever
throughout
they want.
history.
No asset is safe. Yeah.
No asset is safe. So if you want to live safely and peacefully, you have to have different assets
Yeah.
in different sovereign states, in
Yeah.
different jurisdictions.
Right.
You have some maybe, well, I say there are two worlds. One world is the Anglo-Saxon world of Canada, the US, Britain, and Australia. These are the insane people. The same people, they live in Africa and in Latin America and in Asia and so forth. They are relatively neutral, you understand?
Isn't that
don't
funny?
take
Because
sides.
the Anglo world that you mentioned thinks South America is so corrupt. And, that's just a constant thing, the corruption, the inflation, the political instability, switching back and forth from dictatorships to democracies. But you view that the opposite.
I live in what people say is a corrupt country.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to do with the government, but we own land.
Yeah.
And we have to go to government offices for the land certificates and this and that.
And you're in Thailand, just to be clear,
yes,
right?
We have never encountered directly corruption.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody says there's corruption, but I haven't encountered it. If you choose to give money to someone, it's your choice. You don't have to in all cases. You can facilitate with money things.
Right.
And, with the vaccine story and this and that, and with the defense industry, there's big money flowing.
Sure.
The US government spends $4 trillion a year, okay? That's the government expenditures in the US. They collect tax about 3 trillion. The 4 trillion, if the country is very honest, 5% will be stolen.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the most honest country in the world. Like Norway, Switzerland,
right.
the Netherlands,
Yep.
Sweden, Finland. In America, what is stolen is probably 10, 20%. In Africa, 90% is stolen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. So let's talk about Europe for a minute, if we can. What are your thoughts about the euro as a currency and the European Union in general? Can it stay together? Can that whole system hold?
This is a very interesting question, and I want to answer it the following way. When they started this whole expedition against Ukraine in February, Mr. Biden, he proclaimed that NATO had never been as strong as it is now. This is wrong. We have huge demonstrations in Europe because people say, why do we give so much money to Ukraine and we have nothing? We don't have enough to eat. You understand? The pensioners in Europe, they're mad as hell because the pensions don't go up a lot, but the cost of living are going up a lot, more than 10% per annum.
Sure.
So, people have to
higher
cut
in some
back
places
on shopping. And the income of retirees and people in Germany is relatively low, say, compared to the US and compared to Switzerland. And so now you have in all these countries, European countries, very strong opposition parties who say, why do we do this? Are we fighting a war for the US? The US benefits. The US sells now oil and natural gas to Europe. Before they could get it cheap from Russia, now they buy it from the US expensively. People are dumb, that no doubt. And about subjects I don't study, I'm also not very familiar. But people wake up and, there are lots of voices. The media doesn't tell the people the truth. But because of that, nobody trusts the media and they go to other sites and so forth. They listen to programs like yours and they realize, well, the big loser in this whole conflict is Western Europe. It's as if some people in America wanted to destroy Western Europe.
That's a very interesting take. Any comments on the Soros organization when you say that?
I don't need to give you any comments. It's obvious.
Yeah, okay.
It's out to destroy, the country where he made all his money.
Yeah.
He's not a nice man. He's very intelligent. He's very bright, academically brilliant. I met him a few times. Very smart, but not nice.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he's doing it, but it has to do with Israel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or his view of the role of Jews in the world. That is clear to me. But if you say it, you're an anti-Semite. So, but because I'm already a racist, I can also be an anti-Semite now.
Be careful of the woke mob.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's obvious. He's doing something that is destructive. I want to tell you, I know this case very well because I know the leader of the Hong Kong student demonstrations, okay? The Hong Kong student demonstrations occurred.
I was there, by the way. Literally, I left Hong Kong the week before that started.
Yes.
I mean, just incredible timing, but.
Yes, but anyway, the point is, this was organized and financed by American NGOs. 100%.
Yeah.
And what is the result? And the result was predictable because, look, China is a country with 1.3 billion people. Do you think they're going to let Hong Kong just say, walk out of the China Union?
Yeah, of course not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And what then happened is China stamped down on these demonstrations. And in order to prevent this from happening again, ever, they introduced very tough security laws. I mean, my friend, he's a wealthy businessman. He was supporting the demonstrators. He's going to go to jail for a long time.
Wow.
He's 74 years old. It's not so pleasant at that age to be in jail. And, there's not in Switzerland, the jail is like a luxury pension.
Yeah.
You can choose your meals and this and that. You have heating, you have whatever. Not in Hong Kong.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not in China for sure. One of the things that may have surprised some people, and by the way, some of these questions are from one of our listeners, Manny Kim at Giza Capital, a hedge fund that he runs. And he asked about dollar strength versus other currencies. It's just sort of an interesting dynamic. We have this seriously high inflation in the US, worse in Europe, in many places in Europe. Right? Yet the dollar is showing so much strength versus other currencies.
Yes, but open the Bloomberg page with bonds, WB. You can see the yield on the 10 years US Treasury is over 4%.
Right.
On the Swiss franc bond, it's next to zero. In Japan, the 10 years is at 1. They pegged it. They manipulated at 1.25%. So if you're an institution, you manage billions of dollars, or your sovereign wealth fund,
you're going to put it into dollars.
To yourself, well, do I want to invest my billion cash in euros? And then you look at von der Leyen, and you look at Baerbock, and you look at Lagarde at the ECB, or do I want to invest it in the US? I think the US dollar is grossly overvalued. But it doesn't mean that because it's grossly overvalued, it will tumble right away. It was grossly overvalued throughout the 60s, but it took until 71 to really drop. But once it will drop a lot. That I'm sure.
But compared to what is always the question. So when you compare that to the other currencies, will the dollar still outperform? Will the US still hold that sort of Brinks truck status?
Yes, this is possible, but I would argue there are some currencies like the Singapore dollar, which is likely to outperform the US. And this year we have Russia that has outperformed the US, and Brazil, the currency.
Yeah, the real.
And the Singapore dollar has been steady, and Mexico peso has been steady. My sense is the dollar will go down one day significantly, but if you think it through, what is the strongest currency fundamentally? Is the currency that you cannot increase the supply much. So you have to look at platinum, gold, silver.
Right.
These are the three currencies you cannot increase the supply very much. That's what I would own if I were bearish on the dollar. I'm bearish on the dollar, and so I own the precious metals.
Yeah.
I prefer precious metals to the euro.
You know, I have never heard you talk about, and I'm sure you have talked about it, but I just have missed it. Bitcoin. What are your thoughts?
Well, I owned before Bitcoin and so forth. I'm not terribly interested. There are some advantages with Bitcoins, which you don't have with gold.
Right. Portability.
But nowadays they have gold companies where you can buy gold, say in Hong Kong. You can then get it out in London.
Right.
But in a world war, who knows?
Yeah, right. That may just be another, essentially a fiat currency.
But in a world war, you want to be there where you want to be. You understand? You don't want to enter World War III and then say, well, after 3 months, I'm going to travel. Because most likely you won't be able to travel safely.
Right.
That's gone out.
Right.
And like I'm not wildly bullish about Thailand, but I have money in Thailand for the simple reason that maybe one day I can't remit money to Thailand.
Right.
So I want to have at least enough money to buy my whiskey and the beer, go out for my dinners and nightclubs.
Right. You need to have your money somewhat close to you.
I get it. Said that we have no money left.
Yeah, totally understand. Totally understand. Well, Marc, anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up? Any advice you have to our listeners? It's such a pleasure to have you on again.
Well, but I think if you look at the action of central banks, you just said we had this huge increase in interest rates. Yes, it's an unprecedented rise in a very short period of time. I mean, the long bond, if you look at the TLT, the bond ETF, long bond ETF, it's dropped from 170 to now, today it went down to 92, now it's 96. You understand?
Okay.
Never before has the bond market been this weak as we enter a recession. Normally in recessions, the bond market rallies. This time around, if you were a financial advisor and long, and you were a wealthy man, you own stocks and bonds, both. And both went down. Never happened to me before that both went down. Not in the 70s, not in the 82 recession, not in the 1991 recession, and not in 2000, and not in 2007, 8. 2008, 2009, Treasury bonds rallied very strongly.
So what's the action step there? What does that mean to people?
It means, since you're essentially concerned about wealth preservation and wealth building,
right?
If you think it through, we live in a world and we have a price level. Your household has a net value of $3 million. Your neighbor has $5 million. Nancy Pelosi down the road, she has 100 million.
Nancy Pelosi is the world's best investor.
Yes, and she has nice visitors that hammer the husband.
They bring hammers, yes.
In underwear.
Yeah.
Very strange to have a thief break into your house in underwear.
And where was her security? That story is just becoming more and more suspicious every day.
Of course, everybody laughs about the story. Everybody knows it's a big lie.
Yeah.
Something is very fishy. But anyway,
it's very fishy.
The point I want to make is you have the $3 million and everybody else around you has a certain amount of wealth.
Right.
Now, assuming we have money printing and everything goes up, and you go from 3 million to say 6 million,
right,
and everybody else goes also up by 100%. So everybody's the same as before.
Right.
It doesn't happen that way. Someone will become richer and someone less.
Oh, of course, because people are connected and own assets and don't own assets.
But another situation is when everything goes down.
Yeah.
If you are down, say you have 3 million, you lose 300,000, 10%. Your neighbor who has 5 million, he loses 50% because he was in meme stocks.
Right.
And in unicorns and the SPACs garbage. And he invested in things like all these gurus were telling their investors on Reddit.
Yep.
And Pelosi, she drops by 80%. Then your wealth has relatively increased. You understand?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I always say.
Now,
Economics
Pelosi,
is
she
a
will
relative
not go down
game.
by 80% because she gets the inside information.
Sure. Yeah. Which is.
But you understand? So we could go down, but if we and your listeners only drop 10% and everybody else drops 25%, a balanced portfolio this year in the US is down 25%. Balanced stocks and bonds.
There's a great Twitter feed. I just want to mention it because you keep mentioning Pelosi. I think it's called Nancy Tracker, and it tracks all of her investments and how she manages to get returns of like 69% annually. It's amazing. And of course, Twitter, well, the old Twitter at least, canceled that account and it reappeared again under a slightly different name. But it's just the corruption is disgusting. It really is. Do you want to give out a website or a Twitter handle or anything?
Well, I have the website, gloomboomdoom.com, all in one word, gloomboomdoom.com.
Right.
And the website, I don't know, is Marc Faber, I guess, or Gloom Boom, or yeah. I don't know. But I have a Twitter account. We send out Twitter messages once a month when I publish the report.
Good stuff. Thank you for joining us. It's always great to talk to you, and keep in touch, okay? Be well.
And I wish you and your viewers a wonderful festive season. And if we don't talk before, Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mark, and Merry Christmas to you.